Jack Harper had lived alone in the Montana wilderness for many years. At 75, he didn't need much to feel happy, just the fresh air, towering trees, and the chirping of birds every morning. Each day passed in absolute peace, with only the rustling of leaves, the gentle murmur of the creek, and sometimes the fleeting shadow of a deer in the early mist. He had grown accustomed to this silence, a solitude that few could endure. But for Jack, it was not loneliness, it was a profound connection with nature. However, one fateful winter day changed his life forever. The sky was gray, and snowflakes fell thick and silent, blanketing the forest in white. Jack decided to take a walk, embracing the biting chill of winter. He had no idea that within just a few steps along his familiar trail, he would encounter something that he would never forget for the rest of his life. On an afternoon when the snowfall was heavy, Jack was walking along his usual path when he suddenly heard a painful, broken growl. His heart tightened. It was not the usual sound of a wild animal but the agonized struggle between life and death. He quickened his pace, his hands gripping the old hunting rifle he always carried for protection. As he drew closer, Jack was stunned. Before him lay a massive black bear, its front leg trapped in a steel snare. Deep red blood stained the pristine snow around it. Its eyes glowed with a mix of agony, desperation, and wariness. Its breath was heavy, clouds of steam rising in the freezing air. Jack knew all too well how dangerous an injured bear could be. One small mistake, and he could be torn apart. But he also couldn't turn his back and walk away. Cautiously, he stepped back a few paces, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a piece of bread, gently tossing it toward the bear. It flinched, growled softly, but did not move. Hunger got the best of it, and after sniffing the air, it slowly picked up the bread and ate. This was his only chance. Jack took a deep breath and carefully approached. His hands trembled as he reached for the snare. Using all his strength, he tried to pry it open. The metal groaned, but the trap wouldn't budge. The bear let out a roar, making Jack's heart pound wildly. If it lunged at him now, he wouldn't stand a chance. But the bear just stared at him, its deep eyes seeming to struggle between instinct and trust. Determined, Jack found a sturdy branch and used it as a lever. With one powerful push, the trap sprang open. The bear roared, pulled back slightly, then slowly set its paw down on the snow. It looked at Jack for a long moment before disappearing into the darkness. Jack stood there, breathing heavily, overwhelmed by a strange mix of fear, awe, and a newfound connection. A few days later, while Jack was chopping wood in his cabin's workshop, a familiar sound reached his ears. A deep growl, low but not threatening. He froze, holding his breath. This time, the sound was closer. When he turned around, his heart skipped a beat, the bear had returned. But it wasn't alone. Following behind it were two small cubs, their black fur glossy, their round eyes wide with curiosity. Jack stood still, not daring to move. A mother bear with cubs could be extremely dangerous if she felt threatened. But Maddie, the name he had unconsciously given her, looked at him calmly, without hostility. Slowly, she set a fish down on the ground and stepped back a few paces. The gesture was clear, a thank you from the wild. Jack knelt down, picked up the fish, and met Maddie's gaze. In that moment, he realized they shared a deep understanding, something beyond language or species. It was trust. In the following days, Maddie returned more frequently. At first, she watched from a distance, silent and observant. But over time, she brought her cubs closer to Jack's land, sometimes even resting near his cabin as if it were a safe haven. Jack, in turn, left fruit and bread at the edge of the woods, a quiet gesture of goodwill. Once, he watched as the cubs cautiously approached, sniffing the bread before daring to take a bite. They growled happily, playing with each other while Maddie sat nearby, keeping a watchful eye like a devoted mother. And so, an unusual but beautiful friendship formed. Between Jack and Maddie, no words were needed, no grand gestures, only a quiet understanding between man and the wild. One night, as a fierce blizzard raged outside, Jack sat by his fireplace, cupping a warm mug of tea, the heat keeping the biting cold at bay. Suddenly, a loud scratching at his door startled him. The wind howled, but the sound was distinct, urgent. Who could be outside at this hour? He opened the door, and there stood Maddie, her fur covered in snow, her breath heavy, eyes filled with panic as if she were trying to tell him something. She growled softly, stepped back, then moved forward again, her gaze pleading and urgent. She wanted him to follow. Sensing something was wrong, Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed his thick coat, stuffed a flashlight into his pocket, and rushed out, braving the storm. Maddie led the way through the deep snow. The wind lashed at his face like sharp whips, cutting through his skin. Every step was a struggle, his legs sinking into the drifts, the cold creeping through his body. But Maddie's large form ahead was his only motivation to push forward. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a hollow in the forest. Jack shone his flashlight, and his heart nearly stopped. Buried in the thick snow, two children, Sophie and Ben, lay shivering, their bodies curled up, faces pale. Snow had almost completely covered them, their breaths faint. If he had arrived even a little later, they might have been lost forever. Without hesitation, Jack rushed to them, wrapping his coat tightly around their fragile bodies, rubbing their hands to bring warmth. They barely reacted, only letting out weak whimpers. "Come on, little ones, hold on," Jack murmured, his voice trembling with worry. Maddie stood close, her eyes filled with concern. She lowered herself, as if trying to shield them from the wind. With his last ounce of strength, Jack lifted Sophie and dragged Ben along. The storm did not relent, but Maddie pressed ahead, shielding them. Every step was a battle, but giving up was not an option. At last, they reached the cabin. Jack laid the children near the fire, his hands shaking as he rubbed their frozen fingers. Slowly, warmth spread through them. Sophie stirred, her eyelids fluttering before she finally whispered, "Mom." In that moment, Jack felt as though he had just witnessed a miracle in the midst of a deadly blizzard. The tale of "the bear that saved lives" quickly spread through the town. People were astonished and moved by the intelligence and kindness of a creature they had once thought was purely driven by instinct. The town held an annual festival to honor nature. Jack, his eyes shining with conviction, spoke. "Maddie is not just a bear. She is a friend, a mother, and proof that there is a deep connection between humans and the wild. If we respect nature, it will return the favor with wonders beyond our imagination." In the years that followed, Maddie's visits became less frequent. But whenever Jack stood on his porch, gazing into the forest, he hoped to see that familiar silhouette once more. When Jack passed away at the age of 85, the townspeople planted a small forest near his cabin, naming it Harper's Refuge to honor the man and the bear who had forever changed their perception of nature. Maddie's footprints would eventually fade beneath the snow, but her story would echo in the wind, living on in the hearts of those who cherished the wild.